What's an instant red flag someone showed right after sleeping with you?
Wait, before we continue, I want to say a quick hi. This is me, Laura, and I am the person behind this channel. YouTube is shutting this channel down, and I need your help. I've just launched a new channel called Laura Reads. There, I'll be reading Reddit stories in my own voice and posting more frequently. I'd appreciate it if you could check it out and subscribe. Thank you so much for your support. It truly means a lot.
I met up with a Tinder match the same day at 11:30 p.m. at a bar. We flirted for about an hour and then went back to her place. We banged and literally, as I was washing off, she said, "We need to talk about how I'm going to meet your mom because even though I respect her work as a crimes detective, I'm super ACAB and need to let her know all cops are awful." She then spent the next 30 minutes ranting about the police and what it would be like when we met each other's families. I tried to steer the conversation away multiple times, but she didn't take any of the hints. Eventually, she noticed I hadn't said a word in about 10 minutes and asked if she had made things weird. I said, just a little bit. She suggested we bang again without any protection this time, but I said I had whiskey dong and wouldn't be able to perform. I called an Uber 20 minutes later. I ran into her a few months later while I was on a date with someone else. It wasn't fun. Story 2. Whenever we were just hanging out, his closet door would be closed. The moment things got intimate, he'd open both closet doors right before we started. I kept having this recurring feeling that he might be recording us because he did it every single time. I felt really unsafe. He would also shower right after us doing it, but never invite me to join, even though my hygiene was fine. He was a boxer and would sometimes play fight with me, but it felt aggressive rather than playful, like he was testing or desensitizing me to his outbursts. The whole situation only lasted 3 months, but it left me with more trauma than people I've known for years. Story 3. I did it with a woman about a month ago. In hindsight, my ex left me because I punched him for cheating on me was a clear red flag. Afterwards, during pillow talk, she wanted a second round and tried to induce my mood by staring intensely and poking my ribs. I joked, "Is this how you get a guy in the mood? Do you think guys in a fight just get hard?" She called me gay and kept digging her fingers into my ribs. I told her to stop assaulting me, and she immediately escalated, screaming that what I did, sleeping with her, was more of an assault than that. I left right away. Later, I got a "had fun" text, then went to sleep and woke up to, "You're just going to ignore me?" Long story short, don't ignore violent red flags and don't proceed if someone is openly comfortable with violence. Story 4. I did contract. IT work for a hotel, and one of the companies running a workshop there needed support. The guy leading it was very attractive, and there were obvious signals between us while we were talking. Later that day, we ran into each other again, and he told me his fantasy was being surprised in a hotel room by staff and being used. I hadn't had any in months, so I said I could do it and asked for the room number and timing. I went to his room, surprised him while he was in the shower, and we did it. Afterwards, he turned around, looked me in the eye, and casually mentioned he had a wife and kids at home, and that he enjoys traveling for work so he can do things like this. I felt immediate guilt. I hate cheating, and I've been cheated on before, so it really hit me. I asked if his wife knew about any of this, and he said no, and that none of his coworkers should know either. I got dressed quickly and left. Even though I know I wasn't the one cheating, being unknowingly involved in it messed with me for a while. I even considered contacting his wife but decided not to escalate it further. He continued attending workshops at the hotel, but I made it very clear I would never interact with him again. Story 5. This happened a while ago. I met a guy through apps and we got on really well. After meeting a few times, I went to his place. We each took half an E and then did it. Right after, he told me that doing it with me made him realize how much he wasn't over his ex and said I had to leave. He kicked me out while I was still rolling and expected me to drive myself home. I went to a park nearby instead so I could chill until I was okay to drive. I should have blocked his number immediately because about a week later he messaged apologizing. He said his friends told him he was an a-hole and that he needed to apologize. Then he asked when we could meet again. I can't believe I ever did it with that dumb A. Story 6. When I was living in Seoul, I hooked up with a guy I met at my place after a breakup. Afterwards, we were lying in bed when he suddenly got really jittery. He said he needed to go to the convenience store to get cigarettes and asked if I wanted anything. I asked for a cola. He said he'd be right back, but he seemed so panicked that he forgot to put on his socks. He stared at them for a moment, muttered that he'd get them later, and rushed out. After about 15 minutes, I realized he hadn't come back, even though the store was downstairs. I texted him and he replied saying he was sorry, that I was a good person, but he had a girlfriend and needed to be better to her. I was mostly annoyed that he left me all bare in bed and I never got my cola. He also left his socks in my entryway. About 2 years later, he messaged me out of nowhere saying he still thought about me, that I was the prettiest girl he'd ever met, and asking how I was doing. I told him I was over it and pointed out he was clearly still in a relationship. He agreed, apologized again, and then asked if I wanted to get coffee. I blocked him after that. Story 7. This just happened last weekend. We had a 2-hour coffee date followed by plans for a movie and a nightcap. I could tell he was very invested and I knew I wasn't, but I was open to something casual because he had told me during the date that he was recently separated and going through a divorce. Fast forward, we started kissing and did it. It wasn't great because there was barely any reciprocation and only lasted a few minutes. The next morning, I could tell his behavior had shifted and we parted ways. Half an hour later, I got a text asking if he could ask me an awful question he couldn't stop thinking about. He asked if I was born a woman. We had literally just had slept together. I had also told him about my 160-pound weight loss and skin removal surgery, and that I was on birth control. It made no sense. He said it was because I mentioned I have larger hands and feet for a girl. I'm 5'10", and I used to be self-conscious about it, but it's just genetics. I'm still very feminine. That's what happened. Story 8. He went on and on about his job as a college football coach, even though I tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. Then he said, "I think women coaches are a joke and I refuse to take them seriously," and added, "It really pisses me off that I've been passed over for high-ranking coaching jobs because they need black guys for their diversity hire Bs. I'm way more qualified." I was just sitting there bare, completely stunned. Then he had the audacity to ask, "Why do you look uncomfortable?" I calmly told him I didn't agree with his views and that they went against my values, and that it was a turnoff. He doubled down and got incredulous. I told him to get out of my house. While he was getting dressed, he kept huffing things like, "You're calling me a racist," and "I majored in African studies." Story 9. In the middle of doing it with one of my exes, he stopped and asked to take the protection off. I said no and clearly wasn't comfortable, but he kept pushing until I made him stop so I could move away. He was obsessed with the idea of me with a child, so I'd have someone to come home to when he was away for military work. He even mentioned that on our first date at a movie theater. I ignored it at the time. We didn't last long after I found out he was also dating one of my best friends, who confronted me saying, "You're ruining our life. He's supposed to be my baby daddy." I told her to take him. I didn't want the drama. Joke's on him anyway. I later found out I can't have kids. Story 10. I dated a girl I met at a tattoo party. She was 32 and I was 19. She lived with her grandparents, and I was still living with my parents, so I got us a motel room for the weekend. We had a great time, and afterwards she asked me to go to a local bar. I found out she was a regular there, and because she knew the owners, she was buying me alcohol all night even though I was underage and nobody cared. At some point, she went to talk to people she knew, and I went to the restroom. When I came back, she was making out with some random guy at the bar. I told her I wanted to leave immediately, but she was drunk and angry that I was upset. After a long argument in the parking lot, she jumped into a random drunk guy's truck as he was leaving. I jumped in too, trying to get her back to the motel so we could talk. So I'm in the truck with a stranger driving drunk, asking him to drop us off while she's saying she's going with him instead of me. We then got pulled over by state police. I was underage, so they breathalyzed me. She told me to put a penny in my mouth to pass it, and somehow I passed. The driver got arrested for DUI. He asked me to take his truck back to the motel, so I ended up driving it back. It had no working brakes, but I somehow made it safely. The moment we arrived, she started going through his truck and stealing his things. She took his wallet, cash, and valuables. then called her ex, who was also her dealer, to buy the stuff with the stolen money. I was so angry I packed up and left immediately. She spent the rest of the weekend with her ex and then tried to call me on Monday like nothing happened. I told her it was over. Worst situation I've ever been in. Story 11. We'd gone on a few dates and everything was going really well. We had great chemistry, shared interests, and the intimacy was amazing. Afterwards, while we were cuddling, she asked me to stay the night. We slept wrapped around each other, and I genuinely felt like this could turn into something real. I woke up feeling great and heard her in the kitchen cooking breakfast. The bacon smelled amazing. I sat down thinking about whether I should ask if we were officially a couple or wait. While I was deciding, her small, fluffy dog came into the kitchen, clearly drawn by the smell. Without hesitation, she bent down and slapped the dog hard and shouted, "Out!" in a harsh tone. Then she turned to me, laughed, and said, "He knows he's not allowed in the kitchen." I just sat there in shock and stayed quiet through breakfast so I didn't show how angry I was. The dog kept getting snapped at, just for being around. I made an excuse about needing to pick up a friend and left. Ghosting her felt bad in a way because everything else had been perfect. But that moment was a huge red flag. Story 12. We were in bed talking after hooking up, and I mentioned I needed to get groceries later. She immediately said, "We can use my food stamps. My kids are with my parents right now and they're buying their food." This was someone I had known for about 3 days. She was offering to use benefits meant for her kids to stock up my place. It didn't really go anywhere after that. Story 13. I worked at a place that was mostly seasonal freelancers, and he was a new one. We got drunk and slept together the first night we met, and he stayed with me for about 3 days. But not because I asked him to, he just wouldn't leave. Even when I went to work, he acted like it was normal, saying, "See you when you get back." I didn't really know how to handle it, so I just went along with it, but my roommates thought it was weird too. In those few days, I realized two things. He was between places and using me for somewhere to stay. And in all his stories, everything was always someone else's fault. He was always the victim. I felt bad at first, but eventually I told him he needed to leave. He stayed at a friend's place after that. I went to visit him there, and after we banged, he told me it was actually the place of a girl he used to hook up with. When I looked into it more, I wasn't even sure he wasn't still seeing her. We weren't official, but it still felt gross. His constant victim stories were getting annoying, and that was the final straw. I told him I wasn't interested anymore. He seemed fine with it, but a few weeks later, a coworker told me he was telling people I wanted to date him, and he rejected me because I was a slut, and that another guy had supposedly slept with me too. That other guy was actually my friend, and I know he would never say that. Most people didn't believe him, but it was still embarrassing that I had ever been involved with him. Story 14. I hooked up with a Tinder match a few years ago. We met at a park, flirted, then hooked up in his truck. It was actually good. 2 days later, he texted asking if I was on birth control. I said no. Then he said the condom might have broken, and he might have finished inside. I was furious. I didn't really engage after that, just let things die out, and went to buy Plan B. A few months later, he found me on Facebook Messenger and asked if we could meet again. I was engaged by then. Hard pass. Story 15. We were in a friends with benefits situation and would hang out occasionally and always have a good time. We went out for dinner one night. 2 days later, I saw a Facebook post asking people to identify a vehicle involved in a fatal hit and run. I sent a screenshot thinking it was just a similar-looking car. It wasn't. It was them. They eventually turned themselves in, lost a 6-figure job, and since then, their life has fallen apart. It still feels surreal to think about it. Both that they could do something like that, even if it was an accident in the early hours of the morning, and that I had been close enough to them to be in that kind of relationship. It still makes me uncomfortable thinking I slept with and was friends with someone involved in something so negligent. Story 16. This guy was a walking red flag, but I was young in college and just having fun. One day I was scrolling a viral Twitter thread where women were posting about exes who cheated. I went pretty far down the thread and suddenly saw a picture of the guy I had slept with a few nights earlier, with a caption explaining why his girlfriend had left him. Turns out he had a girlfriend who was literally bartending at the bar we left together. I had no idea he was in a relationship. I felt disgusted and never spoke to him again. The odds of randomly seeing that in a massive viral thread were wild. Story 17. I got the full "of course I wouldn't have done it unless I knew we were going to get married" conversation after the first time we slept together. I was 18, she was 16, and she was very religious. She had actually stalked me for months before being introduced through a third party. When we first met on a setup date, she seemed sweet, intelligent, and focused on her future. I was also religious at the time, so I thought things made sense. She wore a chastity ring, and I assumed it was all consistent with that. But the first time we were alone, she became very physical very quickly and even brought condoms. Later, I learned she believed God had told her I was her future husband, so she thought it was acceptable to act like we were already married. Story 18. He casually mentioned that he doesn't believe in outer space. I was confused and asked what he meant, like, it doesn't exist? He said no, it doesn't. It's a projection. There's a giant dome around the Earth, and the moon and stars are just projections onto it. I tried asking questions, but all I got was, they are doing it to control us. It was genuinely bizarre because he seemed completely normal in every other way. No other conspiracy theories came up in the month or so we were seeing each other, but he fully believed we live under a giant dome. Story 19. I've got two. First one, I met a girl at a club, brought her back to my place, we smoked, and had intense banging all night. It was the first time I was actually sore afterwards. In the morning, I drove her home since she didn't have a car. It was about 90 minutes out in the middle of nowhere. And she kept asking every few minutes things like, that wasn't just a one-night stand, right? And you're going to call me, right? She also added me on Facebook while I was still driving. I've never been so relieved to drop someone off. Second one. I wasn't even that into her, but impulsively asked if she wanted to hook up. She said yes, so I went over to her place. She was very nervous and said she'd never done anything like this before. She offered me a shot, and every time I had one, she had two. That probably should have been my sign to leave. We did it, I cleaned up, and said I was going to head out. She immediately started crying and said she was going to hurt herself. I ended up staying for hours to calm her down. She told me she had bipolar disorder. In hindsight, it was a really sad situation. Story 20, I've got a few. He said he needed to go, but while getting dressed, he pulled a wedding ring out of his pocket and put it on. Mid-hookup, he answered his ringing phone and said, I'm 45 minutes away, but I'll be there ASAP to take her to the emergency room. Then explained his kid had a gym accident and needed stitches. He said he was married with kids and wanted to come back the next day to make it up to me. After finishing, he said, that was nice, but this isn't my house and they don't know I'm here, so we need to leave quickly. Then he asked if I could help him rewrite his resume because he'd been out of work and didn't know what to do with it. Finally, he said, I know that was way better for me than it was for you, and I'm not even sorry. And I just said, it's fine. I didn't even know you started, let alone finished. Story 21. We had been talking for a few weeks before meeting, including long phone calls and FaceTimes, and we both said that if it went well, we wanted something serious. I finally went to see him, and while we were cuddling afterwards, he got on Tinder and started talking to his matches. I was 17 and really liked him, and somehow we still ended up in a relationship for 3 years. He was emotionally cheating the entire time, and I still didn't leave. Looking back now, I just shake my head at my younger self. I wouldn't give someone like that the time of day now. Story 22. I went to take a shower and came back to find her in the kitchen making dinner with ingredients I had bought for the next day with friends. An expensive bottle of wine I had been saving already opened, and a large bag she had brought from her car filled with enough clothes, toiletries, and toys to last a week in Vegas. She had also brought 3 of her own pillows, placed them on my bed, and moved my cat's food and water bowls to put a white noise machine on the dresser. I let her stay the night but told her the next morning to never contact me again. She later ended up getting hired at the same company I worked for, so we were co-workers for 2 years after that. Story 23. I witnessed this one. A girl got blackout drunk and hooked up with my roommate. She had a long-term boyfriend in the military who was deployed. At first, I thought she had been taken advantage of, but then it happened multiple times over the next few days, and I realized it was consensual despite knowing about her relationship. She eventually broke up with him over text, saying it wasn't working out while he thought she was staying at a friend's house the whole time. My own story: a girl told me she loved me the second time we hooked up, and I later found out I had HPV, which I unknowingly passed on. Story 24. One of my exes used to recite spell-like things next to me when she thought I was asleep. I let it go at first because she was quirky. She was a red-headed goth, so I kind of ignored it. But I drew the line when she said she was casting a spell for us to be together forever, and that bad things would happen if we ever broke up. Then another ex told me 5 days after we slept together that she actually wasn't on birth control and that her period was late, despite repeatedly telling me she was on the pill. Not sure if there's a pattern, but my love life is making me start to believe there is. Story 25. I met a bigger woman at a bar who wouldn't leave me alone. I was over the bar and just wanted to go home, so I let her drive me. At my place, she asked if I had food. I had ribs I had just cooked. She ate the entire half rack in under 10 minutes, then told me, "You clean up, I'll be in your bed waiting." So I ended up cleaning up while she went to my bed. When I came in, she was asleep. Later, she woke up and said I was supposed to do it with her. I agreed to just blowy, and she gave a good one for a minute or two, then stood up, and I immediately noticed a strong, bad smell and just couldn't continue. I told her I had a friend coming over as an excuse and asked them to help me get her out. I didn't want her driving drunk. I ended up sleeping on the couch with my friend while she took my bed and refused to shower, insisting she was clean. Story 26. It's a petty red flag, but it drove me nuts. This was around 2014 to 2015. My friend with a hot tub invited me over for a couple of beers, and there were already 2 girls chilling in it. I jumped in and started talking to the girl my friend brought for me to meet. She was cute, a nurse, working at an old folks' home in town. We made out a bit in the hot tub and quickly did the "your place or mine" thing. We went to her place and hooked up. I was on new medication, so it took me a while, but we got there eventually. At some point, she opened Facebook and was typing in that old early 2000s text style, like, "Do you want to go to day mall?" I asked if she always typed like that. She said yes. I asked if she could type normally since she had a full keyboard now. She said she'd try, but didn't really. Every message after that felt like I was texting a teenager instead of a licensed nurse in her mid-20s. I eventually just stopped replying. That's the pettiest reason I've ever stopped talking to someone I hooked up with. Story 27. When I was younger and naive, I met a girl in a dimly lit bar. Beer goggles may have been involved. She looked really good, skinny, blonde, wearing braces. We didn't talk much, but later she asked for a ride home. On the way, she said she didn't want to go home and asked to crash on my couch. I said, okay. I set her up on the couch and went to bed. About an hour later, she came into my room, and there was a strong chemical smell. She then got into my bed, sat on my face, and did something I won't fully describe, then went back to the couch. The next morning, I realized she wasn't wearing braces. Her teeth were just badly damaged and looked like it in the dark. She was clearly a heavy drug user, which I didn't pick up on at the time. I drove her home and never saw her again. Story 28. She came home with me from a bar, and everything was fine at first. On the way to the bathroom, she drank whiskey straight from my freezer without asking, which I thought was odd but didn't make a big deal about. Then she asked me to call her boyfriend to pick her up. I had no idea she had one. It wasn't an open relationship. By then, she'd had quite a bit to drink and then found out she wasn't supposed to drink at all because of her medication. She started getting unwell, so I ended up helping her downstairs and putting her in her boyfriend's car when he arrived. He later messaged me pretty angrily, and I found out he worked at the store I used to go to, so I stopped going there as much after that. Story 29. They became emotionally attached almost right away. Even though I told them I didn't have the energy for a relationship because of chronic pain, they acted understanding but were actually dismissive and kept projecting their feelings onto me anyway. I got the ick pretty quickly and eventually had to ask for space and remove them from social media. I just wish I had been firmer earlier, because some people really don't pick up on boundaries or social cues. Story 30. This happened last weekend. It was our first date. We went out for dinner, walked my dog, and then I asked if she wanted to come inside to watch a movie. She said yes, I put on a comedy, but she didn't like it, so we switched to Hereditary. We started making out, went to my room, did it, and eventually fell asleep afterward. I woke up around 4 a.m. and found her sitting upright, staring straight ahead, like she'd seen something unsettling. I asked if she was okay, and she said yes, but told me she couldn't sleep. I ended up driving her home around 5:30 a.m., then went back feeling confused about the whole thing. Story 31. We had a really fun date. Drinks, dinner, then a multi-level club. At one point, a rubber fell out of my pocket. She saw it and started teasing me about it, which I was into. We went back to my place, hooked up, and she left the next morning because of work. Later, I texted her about returning her hat and gloves, thinking it could be an excuse to see her again. Instead, she immediately replied that if I didn't want to see her again, I should just say so and that she didn't need to be coddled. Then she blocked me. Another woman once casually mentioned that she smoked meth while we were lying in bed afterward. That experience alone made me take a break from dating for a while. Story 32. A friend of mine, female, hooked up with a guy from Tinder and stayed the night at his place. He had work in the morning and told her she could let herself out when she was ready. She was still there when he got back at 6 p.m., and apparently he had to basically force her to leave. He never contacted her again. When she told me the story, I said her behavior was pretty unhinged and likely why he didn't message her. She insisted it was completely normal. Story 33. She tried to compare my excessive salt use to her vaping as if they were equal vices. For context, I'm asthmatic and had simply asked her not to vape in my home. During dinner later, she focused on how much salt I used on my pizza and launched into a condescending rant about how it was just as bad as her vaping. Story 34. He thanked me afterward like it was a transaction, and there was something really creepy about it. After that, he turned out to be the most abusive jerk I've ever met. Looking back, that overly formal thanking felt like a red flag, like he wasn't capable of a normal relationship. He was manipulative, angry, arrogant, and blamed all of his issues on his mother, and by extension, on me for being a woman. Story 35. I slept with a guy at his house. His ex-girlfriend, who he's now back with, was still living there and had just returned from a date. After she walked past the room we were in, he went to check on her, and I ended up hearing them doing it, so I left. In hindsight, I should have seen the signs. When we were all in the car together, he would randomly grab either my leg or hers, depending on who was sitting in the passenger seat. He rotated affection between us in a way that felt really gross and uncomfortable. After seeing how openly messy and disrespectful their relationship dynamic was, I wanted nothing to do with either of them. Story 36. We somehow got onto the topic of virginity, and she said hers was the result of essay. I was careful and tried to be respectful, and mentioned that some people don't view that as losing virginity, just to be considerate. She then said that at the time she wanted it, but later decided the guy was an a-hole. So I asked if what we had just done was consensual, and she said yes. I then asked if there was any scenario where she might later consider it non-consensual depending on something I did, and she said maybe. That was the last time we saw each other. Story 37. She gave her number to a total stranger right in front of me the day after I slept with her, then invited him over to her apartment the same night. There were 3 of us just hanging out there with her. I wasn't sure what the intention was. Maybe she was trying to set up something like a foursome, I don't know. I later found out she was a heavy alcoholic and that it was basically a big part of her personality. That night, she was already out of it, and I tried to step in and keep things from getting out of hand. That seemed to annoy both the stranger and her friend, who kept saying she could do what she wanted. After trying to de-escalate things for a while, I realized it wasn't my situation to manage, so I left and checked into a hotel since I was visiting from out of state. The next day, I found out one of the guys was still there, and the other one, the one she gave her number to, ended up sleeping with her that morning after waking her up. She later said she just lost control because of alcohol, but from what I saw, she was sober when she gave him her number and invited him over. I'm not used to hookup culture, and I thought I was just spending a weekend with someone I liked. Instead, it turned into a chaotic situation. I even nearly got into a fight with one of the guys because he was being disrespectful. When she's sober, she's actually great. But when she drinks, it becomes a mess, and I ended up feeling like I was constantly trying to manage the situation. In the end, I realized I should have left the moment she gave her number out in front of me. Story 38. Maybe not a red flag, but I went on 3 or 4 dates with a woman over the course of almost 2 months. After that, she suddenly started becoming more distant. I've always felt that communication usually gets easier after the first few dates, especially once things become more personal. But with her, it went in the opposite direction. It didn't seem like she thought she had made a mistake, but it felt like she needed more reassurance, even though I wasn't giving her any reason to doubt things. I was open to continuing and figuring things out, but she didn't seem very interested anymore, so it ended there. Story 39. A woman I worked with wanted to hook up, so we did. Afterwards, she gave me a speech about how good-looking people like me have an easy life, and how unfair it is for others because of it. I'm slightly above average height, and I'd say my looks are pretty average, and we were very much on the same level looks-wise. I basically just did a quiet exit after that. Story 40. They started talking about how they were a god in bed, saying every woman they'd been with was satisfied, then went into graphic detail about it and insisted they were definitely able to do the same for me. I didn't really respond and just got dressed while they kept talking. I was too polite to just leave, but in hindsight, I should have. It went on for about 45 minutes before I managed to excuse myself. Story 41. I spent a pleasant evening with a girl from Tinder, just talking and eating. Nothing major, but the conversation was good. Later we banged and she stayed over. Immediately after, she became very clingy, holding me all night, calling me my love, and talking about decorating my bedroom. It was understood beforehand that this was at most a casual situation, or a one-time thing, but she was already acting like we were in a serious relationship. It honestly scared me off. Story 42. She called her boyfriend while still in bed with me the next morning. The wild part was she was angry at him for not telling her what he was doing the night before. I had no idea she had a boyfriend. She told me they broke up because he went off to college. That part was true, but still misleading. I wasn't innocent either. She was a friend of my ex, and my ex had cheated on me, so there was a lot of messy context. It was a long time ago. Young and dumb all around. That was basically the end of any relationship drama for me. Story 43. I was in a committed poly relationship at the time, and the guy knew and was fine with it. Immediately after doing it, he told me I was stupid for being poly. He said that because I'm a woman, I could get so jealous or emotional about my partner seeing other people that I might end up in prison. Story 44. I had an ex who had a 2 to 3 year old child from a previous relationship. We had been together for about 3 months when, one morning, her child slept in. So we ended up doing it. Afterward, we stayed in bed and she started drifting back to sleep when her child began crying from another room and calling for her. She responded by yelling some of the worst things I've ever heard a parent say to a child, saying she hated them, wished they had never been born, and hated having them there. As a naive 19-year-old, I let it slide at the time, but she turned out not to be a good person. We dated for about 6 months before drifting apart after she moved away. Later, I found out she had been sleeping with multiple other people while we were together. Story 45. The morning after, I went into the bathroom to freshen up and saw the shower curtain was closed, which seemed normal. For some reason, I had a strong urge to look inside. I immediately regretted it. The shower floor was covered in a thick layer of slime-like buildup mixed with huge clumps of long shed hair. It was completely covered. No visible clean surface at all. It looked at least an inch thick. I quickly left the bathroom and sat awkwardly at the counter while he made breakfast. I couldn't help myself and ended up saying, I saw the shower floor. He didn't seem embarrassed at all and just said his stepdad never cleaned, so he stopped cleaning too as a point. I asked how he even showered, and he said he just ignored it and stood barefoot in it every day. I was completely disgusted and made an excuse to leave as quickly as possible. I ghosted him after that. Story 46. I stayed over at my ex's place after we'd both been drinking heavily. His parents were downstairs, and it was already around noon, but he still wasn't waking up or acknowledging I was there. I felt too awkward to leave with his parents around, so I kept trying to wake him up. He wouldn't budge, and I started questioning my life choices. When I got home, I immediately broke up with him. Story 47. I went to her house to hook up the same day we met on an app. Shortly after I arrived, a guy showed up, apparently her neighbor, because he saw a different car in the driveway. He ended up hanging out for about 2 hours. When he finally left, we hooked up. Afterwards, she wanted to take selfies together to show her friend. I reluctantly agreed. She kept insisting on a better photo, turned and kissed my cheek as I was pulling away, and snapped the picture anyway. Then she complained it wasn't good enough and wanted another one. Story 48. I wish I'd gotten here earlier, but this will probably get buried. I hooked up with a friend of a friend. She was cute, fun, and loved dancing. We went back to my place and did it. It was really good. Afterwards, she rolled off me, sat on the edge of my bed, reached into her purse, pulled out a pipe, lit it, and started smoking. I was completely shocked. The next week, I went to get tested for HIV and other STDs. The doctor said he normally wouldn't bother since I didn't have any symptoms, but I insisted after finding out what had happened. Story 49. We did it on the second date, and I met her boyfriend on the third. I went to pick her up, and she immediately jumped on me, wrapping her legs around me and kissing me. I ended up sitting in her living room while she got ready because I had arrived a little early. Then there was a knock at the door, and she quickly told me, "Pretend you're just my friend." I assumed it was her aunt since she had recently moved and only had one relative nearby, so I agreed. She opened the door and a large man walked in. She jumped on him and kissed him the exact same way she had kissed me. Then she introduced me as her friend from college. He was incredibly friendly, brought her flowers and a large Easter egg, and mentioned that he wouldn't get to see her on Easter because he needed to spend it with his mother. Story 50. He turned around and replied to his girlfriend on WhatsApp, "I love you too." Apparently, I wasn't red enough for him, but we still ended up together. After about a year and a half, he did the same thing to me. Eventually, I reached out to his ex. I apologized because I felt like I needed to get it off my chest, even though I was nervous about it. She was actually really kind, and we ended up talking for a while. She told me about other things he had done, and I shared what happened during our breakup. In the end, it felt like we both realized he was the problem, and were just relieved to be done with him. Story 51. I've been lucky. I've never had anything like this happen to me. But back in university, a friend told me he was getting lucky and suggested I stay out for a while. So I crashed somewhere else for the night. The next day when I came back, I was hit with the smell of something burnt. There was a pile of wet clothes and bed sheets on his bed. I asked what had happened, and he told me the girl had suggested it would be sexy to do it in a candlelit room. Afterward, while he was tired and a bit drunk, she suddenly stood up, threw the candles onto the bed, and started screaming that all men are pigs who will sleep with anyone before storming out and leaving her clothes behind. The bedding caught fire almost immediately. He managed to put it out with water, but the damage had already been done. We ran into her about 2 weeks later at a bar, and she immediately turned around and left. Story 52. This woman I'd been chatting with on Tinder had recently separated after a messy marriage. Our first coffee date went well, she seemed normal, and she mentioned that she had only ever been with one person, her ex, since they had been together since they were teenagers. A couple of days later, she drunk dialed me and showed up at my apartment. She was extremely intoxicated, smelled strongly of alcohol, and basically threw herself at me. I tried to keep things calm, but she clearly wasn't in a good state of mind. Eventually, I asked her to leave and called her an Uber when she refused. As she was finally leaving, I closed the door and suddenly heard a loud crash. She had fallen down the stairs and broken her ankle. Story 53. My flatmate had a girls' night at our place, and when they were heading out to the bars, one of the girls asked if I wanted to join them for a drink. I said yes because she was cute and we got along really well. Later that night, she asked me to walk her home so she could feed her pet rabbit, saying we'd meet back up with the group afterward. We didn't. The next morning, she woke up crying and told me she had a fiancé and didn't know what to do. I made an excuse and left. A few weeks later, she was hanging out with my flatmate again and told me they had broken up. I was 21, she was attractive, and we ended up hooking up again. The next day, she asked if I wanted to be her boyfriend. I tried to gently turn her down, and she responded by sending me a handwritten message saying she hated me, that I had ruined her life and that she had started hurting herself. She also told me to off myself. A week later, she sent another message apologizing, saying she was bipolar and that she hoped we could still be friends. Story 54. She got up around 3 a.m. to go home because she had to take her friend grocery shopping the next morning. After a bit of questioning, while I was still bare in bed and she had her purse on her shoulder, it turned out she was actually taking her alcoholic ex, who she said she was kind of still with, shopping because he had lost his license. She said it was fine because he knew about me and then clarified that he didn't know my name. I ended things right there. In the same conversation, she asked for breakup banging. I was lost for words. Story 55. We talked for a couple of weeks, agreed to keep things casual, and hooked up a few times. Then he blocked me on Thursday. On Sunday, he came back apologizing, saying he got nervous because he started liking me. I told him it was fine. Just don't block me again. We hooked up again a few more times, and then he blocked me again the following Thursday. This kept happening for about 4 weeks, then block. Apologize and repeat, until I finally told him to leave me alone. He still texts me sometimes, and it's honestly made me uneasy. Story 56. I picked up a woman at a gas station when I was 21 and brought her back to my place. We drank for a while and ended up doing it. I lived on the second floor and my bedroom bordered an overgrown lot. I woke up to her opening my window and saying she had to leave. I offered to drive her home. She just smiled, climbed out the window, and jumped down into the yard. I watched her roll down a hill, get up, hop a fence, and disappear into the night. I ran into her again later that year at a bar. She wanted to hook up again, but I passed. Not because it was bad, but because I didn't want to deal with whatever that situation was a second time. Story 57. I had a brief affair with a married woman when I was around 20 or 21. She was about 40. It was a stupid situation. I was young and not thinking clearly. At first, it mostly involved flirting and making out until one time we actually did it. Afterward, while we were lying there, she suddenly started talking about us moving in together, saying her kids were older, so it wouldn't affect them much, and mentioning how she would miss her dog because I had cats. She started planning furniture, decor, and even said I would need a better job because I'd now be supporting 2 people. For me, it had only ever been a casual fling, and she had always acted like she felt the same way until that moment. Things escalated badly after that, and I eventually had to move because she became obsessive. It made me realize how badly I had misjudged the situation, and I never repeated that mistake again. Story 58. She told me about losing her virginity to a middle-aged coworker at a fast food job who immediately regretted it afterward and said it was wrong. She had pursued the situation herself. Hearing that definitely made me question what I was getting into. We still ended up together again after that, but we're friends now. She's actually very nice, and she's married with a child now. Story 59. I was the red flag. At a student ball, my girlfriend bought me an expensive ticket. I hooked up with other people that night, ignored her, got drunk and high, and didn't care that she was upset. She cried all night while I slept through it. She eventually left me for someone else, but I didn't care at the time because I was seeing other people anyway. I continued similar behavior in other relationships, cheating, treating people badly, and not valuing them properly. Looking back, it was all toxic behavior, and I regret it. Eventually, I changed. I've been with my wife for many years now and haven't cheated or repeated that behavior since. I'm ashamed of my past. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.